everybody. So there are many voices in this story. You'll notice my voice doesn't really change at all as I read them, so just use your imagination. All right, so this story is called Seconds. It's in my first collection called Dreadful Tales of the Dead and Dying. If there's one thing you shouldn't be, Grandma said, scooping an off-white hillock of mashed potatoes onto my plate, it's late for dinner. I wanted to tell her about the traffic on Interstate 35, about the stop signs I rolled through and the red lights I disregarded altogether, but I didn't. I held my plate like an orphan, hoping for a second helping, as Grandma sniffed the steam rising from the potatoes, her eyes misty as if they were chopped onions. Christmas dinner, no less, she added, then whispered in Spanish, hitting the S in each word as if chasing a cat off the porch. The potatoes on my plate might as well have been a 75... Am I in the wrong spot, by the way?
No, you're fine.
Sorry, I just realized I was going to start.
Is this part of the story or not part of the story?
Not part of the story. Where's the tape? The potatoes on my plate might as well have been a 75-pound dumbbell. I limped to the dining room and was confronted with the owl-eyed stares of my siblings. Mom and Dad faced away from me, but the twitch of Dad's shoulders indicated he was stifling laughter. He endured dozens of similar tongue lashings throughout his childhood. At least I had no spouse to suffer alongside me. My siblings-in-law stirred the food on their plates as if checking for errant eyelashes. Way to go, Auron, Sylvia said, rolling the R the way Grandma did when she was disappointed in me. There was Oh, never mind, I said, and sat on the right side of my father. The head of the table was vacant, save for a stray jalapeno that likely rolled off my brother's plate. A fact each of my family members already had time to process. For me, it was like my heart forgot its purpose for a moment. Grandma shuffled into the room, still hitting every S hard enough to make me flinch. She sat beside my mother and sighed forcefully. Forks hovered above plates, gravy-smothered morsels quivering on their tines. Say grace, Auron, she said, not a request, and the R rolled a full second longer than was needed. I understood this was my penance. Yes, Abuela, I said and grasped my father's hand. Jennifer, my sister-in-law, furrowed her brow at my extended fingers until my brother nudged her. Dear Jesus, ow, I cried as my shoe glanced off my shin. Sylvia shook her head and mouthed a word that began with L. I cleared my throat. Dear Lord, thank you for... We lifted our heads as if the prayer had ended, hands clumped in ghost knots as each of us wondered if we should break the connection. Who could that be? Mom asked. On Christmas? Dad added. Grandma's crown of cotton ball curls remained lowered, but there was a nervous energy to her posture. I'll get it, Dad said, and each of us reclaimed our dampened hands. Jamie, my brother, shoveled 2 bites while Dad walked to the front door. I peeked around my mother and saw Grandma crafting silent words, eyes sealed. Of all the people I could have guessed would knock on Grandma's door, the one who did so would not have qualified as a prospect. Dad? Grandma moaned, head now cocked slightly to the side. Dad, what? What? She smiled as her husband ambled into the room, gusts of sweet rot overwhelming the scent of ham and gravy. A fork clattered on porcelain, someone screamed, chairs screeched over floorboards, and the table jostled from a speedy exit. Grandpa? Sylvia whispered. Grandma's chair wailed like a kitten in a snare as she stood. I have something to tell you. She circled her dead husband and pulled out the chair at the head of the table. Grandpa Scarecrow walked to it and sat, as best he was able. His chin touched his chest and one arm landed on the table. The gray fingers crawling like a spider until Grandma helped him find the jalapeno. George came back, Grandma said. What the hell? Dad said, nostrils pinched at the border of the dining room, as if he feared coming any closer would make this experience, obviously a nightmare, more real. Well, he's been coming back every evening for dinner. Mom, what's going on? Dad demanded. The front door slammed and the sound of a car engine occupied the silence of Grandma gathering her thoughts. Jamie's phone chimed, and it was then I noticed his wife was gone. I'm going to check on her, Jamie said, then took the long way out of the room to avoid his dead grandfather. He came back the day after we buried him. Looked an awful mess. Cleaned him up some, though. I don't know how he made it out. My phone chimed, as did those of my sister and parents. Jamie, leaving. Not sure what else to say. Tell Grandpa sorry. Grandpa was hardly better than an awful mess as he sat at the head of the table. Jalapeno pinched between his thumb and fingers as it had been for every meal we ever shared. The skin of his face and neck, typically bronzed from working in fields from Mexico to Texas, then resembled the mashed potatoes in both color and texture. A snail trail of brackish slurry leaked from his left eye. His silver hair was streaked with black, soil clotted at the crown, and bulging from his ears. The smell was the worst part, like flowers in a vase filled with spoiled milk. He's come back every evening, just sits there with his pepper and then goes back to the family plot. I've given up on burying the casket, just track soil in each time and it takes forever. Mom, this is wild. Why didn't you tell us? Dad asked. The jalapeno rolled across the table. Grandma snagged it and tucked it within Grandpa's waiting fingers. How could I tell you? You would send me to the sanitarium and, Grandma said, then swallowed and looked out the window. Mom, Dad said, approaching from behind. He placed a hand on her shoulder. I don't want him to stop. I'm not ready. A small beetle skittered free at Grandpa's sleeve and burrowed into a dinner roll. We migrated to the living room. Only I brought my plate with me, but the others had already eaten at least some of their meals before Grandpa interrupted. So what do we do? Dad asked. Every few seconds he glanced at the dead man in the dining room. What can we do? Sylvia replied. Her husband, Richard, found a seat at the furthest corner of the room. He stared out the window, perhaps willing himself to magically appear on the other side of it. Do we call someone? Mom asked. Who could we call? Sylvia said. Well, I began, mouth half filled with mashed potatoes. We have to figure out why he's coming back. Isn't that what they do with the spirits on those ghost hunting shows? Why do that? Grandma asked. There was a sharpness to her tone, not related to my having arrived late. I was prepared to remind her Grandpa arrived much later than me, but it had not been necessary. So he can go back? So he can be at peace? She fidgeted in her chair, hands wringing her apron. Mom? Grandma shook her head. She looked from her moccasins to her husband. No, she whispered. No, I said. I'm not ready. Dad kneeled beside her and enveloped her small brown hands within his own. Mom, that's not Dad, that's... He began, glancing briefly at the man who was once again searching for his jalapeno. Sylvia interjected. That's a husk, like corn, Grandma. The man you love isn't sitting at the dining room table. He's somewhere better, we can hope. We took turns explaining the fact that Grandpa and his body were not the same thing. We then took turns retreating from Grandma's tears as if they were radioactive. Half an hour later, the mantel clock chimed and the chair leg screeched in the dining room. We followed Grandpa through the dining room, into the kitchen, onto the front porch. We stood on the lawn, our breaths issuing in little clouds, and watched Grandpa lumber toward the darkened hills and his home for the past 4 months. Oh, he always needs help with this part, Grandma said, and power walked to the wooden fence. She guided Grandpa through the gap in the beams, cradling the back of his head. through the gap in the beams. In the glare of the sun, he was a silhouetted automaton, a colt on skates, though he never fell. Grandma rejoined us on the porch. He just goes back? I asked. Every evening, Grandma said. Sometimes I sit there with them, tell him what you and the others have been up to. I don't think he can hear me. I think he's stuck in the routine? Maybe, but it's better than not having him at all. We spoke long into the night, reminiscing about Grandpa with a wide buffer between the memories we offered and his passing that hot August morning. In these stories, he was not an angel, not perfect, he was just Grandpa. Remember when he switched his jalapeno with the ghost pepper? Sylvia said, laughing so that her words were nearly unintelligible. Oh, he was mad. All of a sudden, he wasn't lactose intolerant anymore. I said, hearing echoes of his outbursts, which alternated between Spanish and English. Grandma mostly listened, dabbing her eyes occasionally. She sat in his recliner and ran her wrinkled fingers over the corduroy-like surface. It smelled of him, aftershave that came in a flask, a beer spilled during a seventh-inning nap. As the space between our anecdotes grew, yawns filling the gaps, I approached her with a plan. Abuela, I think he comes back for you. We know how you are about dinner, all of us do. Grandpa knew it so well, even death didn't break the routine. She nodded, eyes locked on his limp Christmas stocking hanging from the mantel. He needs your permission to go. You have to tell him it's okay. She nodded again, barely perceptible, but said nothing. Tomorrow, how about we cook his favorite meal, huh? The whole dinner can be a celebration of Grandpa. But then you have to tell him. You have to give him permission to rest. Maybe, she nodded. Maybe it was just the motion of the recliner. Whatever her true thoughts were, she did not prevent us from urging Grandpa to move on. to go to the light, to rest the following evening when he emerged from the family plot. He simply sat in his usual place, snowflakes melting on his shoulders, the jalapeno a constant moving target. "Your work is done, Dad," my father said. "Petunia is waiting for you," Sylvia pleaded, reminding the dead man of the mutt he adored only slightly less than his own children. "You can't drink beer when you're dead," I tried, gasping as Sylvia's elbow lanced my ribs. Before the chimes that would send Grandpa back to his grave, even Grandma lobbed a few half-hearted attempts. "It's okay, George," she whispered. "You can go." He lifted his head, slowly, a quivering inch at a time. Heart beat faster. This was it. Grandpa's lips parted just a sliver. "Oh my God," Sylvia whispered. "He's going to say something," Dad said. A small field mouse, about the size of my big toe, peeked from the darkness of Grandpa's mouth, its whiskers twitching, spider egg eyes visible for just a second before it retreated. "Bulp!" Dad placed 2 fingers to his lips and dashed into the adjoining room. By the sound of it, the vomit hit the carpet well before it touched porcelain. The clock chimed shortly after, and within 10 seconds of that, Grandpa was walking. Both he and the mouse left the warmth of the house for a cold night in the family plot. Grandpa came back the following evening, and the evening after that. The only acknowledgement Grandpa offered throughout my attempts to persuade him to go to the light was a squeak, and it most likely came from the rodent in his cheek. I returned to my life, as did my sister. Mom and Dad, recently retired, had the freedom to stay a bit longer. Dad kept me informed of their attempts. They wrote signs, they locked the front door, but no one could commit to not opening it. Grandpa just kept knocking. Grandma was afraid the coyotes might get to him. After a week, Dad presented the likely state of their houseplants as a borderline emergency, and he left as well. "Yes, he's still coming back," Grandma said each time she answered the phone, often before I had a chance to speak. By Easter, her affection for him appeared to be slipping. "He tracks mud in. Oh, and his fingers don't work, so I have to put the pepper up his sleeve." By July, she was frantic. "The mouse had babies. They're in the house now. I tried to catch them without killing them, but, well, I don't want to talk about it." December came, and we made our annual sojourn to Grandma's house. This time I did have a significant other, but thankfully we were not at the stage where a Christmas visit with the family was expected. I left a full day early and booked a hotel in Grandma's town so I would not be late for dinner. I was not only early for dinner, but early for lunch as a result of the subsequent 11-minute commute. "Grandma," I said as she opened the screen door. She smiled, but it was hardly more than a twitch, and seemed to melt into me as we embraced. "Are you okay, Grandma? You look..." She nodded, rescuing me from having to think of a flattering way to say old. "Just tired, Aaron." She didn't even roll the R. "Grandpa? He's bad. He doesn't look like George. He's falling apart. There are holes in his face. I can see bone peeking through. His eyes are gone. I'm sorry, Grandma." She used her apron to dab her eyes. "The worst part is I can't remember before. Those good memories, 50 years together, and I can't picture his face from before. Or if I do, a mouse chews through the cheek and starts throwing babies at me." I walked our embrace toward the stove where a pot of water verged on bubbling over. "He doesn't listen. So stubborn, just like before." I slipped free of her arms and lowered the flame. "Well, that's easy to do when..." I began. It hit me then, just a thought, a dumb one, I figured. "Grandma?" "Yes?" "Did you touch Grandpa's stuff after he passed?" "His stuff?" "You know, his things, the stuff he kept in his nightstand, stuff like that." She shook her head. "I haven't had the heart to open that drawer. Why?" My brother and sister had Christmas dinner plans with their in-laws. Sylvia requested a play-by-play of the evening's happenings with Grandpa. Jamie only communicated through thumbs-up emojis. Dinner was served and eaten early, giving me ample opportunity to doubt my plan. Dad paced with his hands glued to his belly, burping under his breath and snapping the blinds open in 30-second intervals. He peppered Grandma with questions about Grandpa's appearance and smell. She soon ran out of new ways to describe them and so repeated herself in Spanish. The clock chimed and 5 minutes passed in a silence only interrupted by the blind snapping. "Is that..." Dad said, his nose to the window glass. "Oh, he's stuck in the fence. Let me get the stick," Grandma said. She waddled out the front door. Dad watched for a time. "I'm gonna be sick," he said and tucked himself into a far corner of the room. "Oh my God," Mom whispered as Grandpa lurched through the front door. Last Christmas, he was still recognizable as Grandpa. His face was unpleasant to look at, his skin the color of mop water, bulging in places and sagging in others, but it was still him. This version was something else, something in the background of a zombie movie. The skin of his face was like a flag after a hurricane, tattered and flaccid. The nose shriveled, retreating toward his hairline, exposing 2 gumdrop holes. He dragged Texas tentacles of weeds and brambles behind him, which Grandma previously warned sometimes hid scorpions. I averted my gaze as I pulled out his chair. He did not sit so much as collapse like a toy robot whose batteries were violently removed, arm falling on the table, fingers mummified but expectant. Mom, eyes open just a sliver, tucked the jalapeno inside Grandpa's shirt sleeve. Nice to see you, George, she said, then swapped places with her husband. Dad juggled an egg in his throat. Do I have to? He asked, the cotton swab quivering between his thumb and forefinger. He's your dad, Mom said. Dad's lips moved, but no sound came from them as the cotton swab came closer to its intended target. Oh, Jesus, Dad said. He plunged the tip into Grandpa's ear canal and loosened a clump of dirt. Ew, it touched my skin. Well, do it right so you don't have to do it twice, Grandma said. I can smell it, Dad said, inserting the opposite end. He wiggled it around, teeth clenched and humming like a hornet trapped under a plastic cup. I think that's good, I said, and Dad pranced away, flinging the cotton swab in the general direction of the kitchen trash can. Here goes nothing, I said, and flipped the hearing aid on, cringing at the high-pitched whine. It was a dumb idea, but the only dumb idea we had not tried. His skin felt like a leather wallet plucked from my back pocket after a day of sitting on it. I backed away and motioned at Mom, who was then nearest to him. She cradled herself, squinting at him as she spoke. George? He twitched, and so did I at the memory of the mouse. George, honey? Grandma said, stepping forward. He turned, aimed the caverns of his eyes at his wife. Oh, George, she said, and then she told him everything she wished he'd known the day he did not wake up beside her. Grandpa did not come back the next evening. He did not come back the evening after that, or any other. Grandpa went to rest in the soil he worked all his life. The whine of his hearing aid sent the mama mouse skittering into the night, along with her dozens of children. Dad and I heaved dirt atop his casket, beneath rumpled clouds threatening snow that would not fall. We said little, and eventually the sound of the hearing aid was lost. The following Christmas, the house was full of life and noise. Grandma earned a great, courtesy of my brother, a little boy, he and his wife named George. Dad moved to the head of the table, more out of necessity than ceremony, and into his outstretched, waiting hand, Grandma placed a fresh jalapeno.